Hello, and welcome to Iowa Ideas In-Depth Week. This week, we're focusing on creative placemaking, and today's session is ingredients for creating place. I'm Diana Nolan, the Arts and Entertainment writer here at the Gazette in Cedar Rapids, and we'll just go around the room, and if our panelists can each introduce yourselves, tell your affiliation and where you are today. We'll start up in the corner with Jason.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Jason Schubach. I am the Dean of the Antoinette Westphal College of Media Arts and Design. It's based at Drexel University in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And my research area is around creative placemaking, the intersection of artists and designers in making places better. So I'm thrilled to be here with you all today. And right at this moment, I'm sitting in a hotel room in Montreal, Quebec.
And Stacy.
I am Stacy College. I'm the Executive Director for the Amana Colony's Convention and Visitors Bureau. We focus on attracting our visitors to this lovely set of 7 villages in the middle of Iowa.
And Courtney.
Thanks, Diana. Hi, I'm Courtney Spearman. I'm with the National Endowment for the Arts. I manage the Design Grit program, and I'm currently the acting director for design and creative placemaking. So I'm here with my creative placemaking hat on today, but also in general, just interested in and excited to share what the NEA has to say about the field of creative placemaking and arts and culture in strengthening communities.
Excellent. We have a wonderful panel today, and I'd also like to give a special thank you to our Iowa Ideas presenting sponsor, which is ITC Midwest. So let's just let's start with what exactly is placemaking? Courtney, would you like to address that?
Sure, happy to do that. The National Endowment for the Arts has a pretty simple definition, and I think this applies to a lot of ways that people think about placemaking. For us, creative placemaking integrates arts, culture, and design activities into efforts that strengthen communities. For us, that means often thinking about how arts and culture and design have a seat at the table to address community challenges that sometimes don't necessarily think about the role of arts and culture in them. So thinking about health and wellness, thinking about economic development, thinking about social cohesion, lots of even related to things like communities addressing climate change or other challenges that they are facing in their communities, ensuring that arts and culture are integrated into those conversations and are an active part of thinking about how arts and culture can strengthen communities in the context of those challenges.
And why is that especially important now as we're coming out of the pandemic and people are getting out more, we're having more events coming? Why is it important to have the arts and culture integrated this way?
That one, no, go ahead. Yeah, that's great.
I think there's sort of 4 really important areas that I think that answer that question. One, I think we all know that arts and culture contribute to quality of life. I mean, who wants to live life without music, whether you sing in your church or love Beyonce or whatever, right? Because this guy loves Beyonce. And then, so it kind of gives us a quality of life, right? It is part of what makes quality of life great. It can build a sense of belonging in communities. So I really think that artists, there's this term culture bearers that people use, which is like the bearers of our culture, that literally might be the person who, knows the hymnals that your community likes or holds the recipes that your community has. And those things, those cultural things help us feel like we belong in a place, right? They make us feel safe. They make us feel like that we belong in a place. So super critical to happiness in a place. They have economic development. I mean, I think people, go out and spend money. They go to a restaurant before they go out to a show, theaters, spend a lot of money on dry cleaning, right? Things like that. And then they can also be really important in helping us plan for our future together, right? Artists and creative people and designers are dreamers of our future. And if you don't have creative people at the table about your future, where's the creative ideas, right? Like, how are you going to jump past the wicked problems we have now and into the future? So, I mean, they're present in your community. I mean, everybody, individual human usually has a cultural practice themselves, may not recognize it. Dancing around your house to TikTok, that's art, right? You know, and all that stuff matters to the human experience. And so I just feel like if you know, a lot of American communities right now have enormous challenges facing them post-pandemic, and if you're not using all the tools you could possibly use, why are you not putting the creatives at the table to help you with that? It would feel foolish not to do that in my mind. So.
Excellent. So what are some of the key components to creative placemaking and successful placemaking? I don't know, maybe you feel like you've just covered that, but is there more to say about that?
I'd love to hear how Stacy does it. That'd be great.
Well, the Amana Colonies obviously has a long history of the arts and creativity. We've had basket weavers and furniture makers. We have a beautiful arts guild that hosts an annual plein air painting festival, and it draws a lot of artists to the community, and it's always been very successful. We have culinary arts here. We have lots of wineries and excellent food, and our meat shop, of course, is a destination for a lot of people. And I think that what's been really good about the Amana Colonies is that they've had this history of the arts in various forms since its inception. And they've made it a priority to share these things with the visitors that come here. It is an inclusive thing. It is a way of, you know, letting our visitors feel like they belong here. They're not just kind of outside observers. They're active participants in the arts and culture that we offer. And I think that's part of why it's very successful here. You know, more recently, we've done more festivals that are based around these various arts, whether it comes from our Wurst Festival, which is all about, you know, bratwurst and sausages coming up on Father's Day. You know, we focus on the skill set that it takes for that particular art form, and we love to have people come and try them and vote for their best. To really, it could be, you know, the music that we share through our various events. But yeah, I think that's probably one of the most important parts, is making sure that not only are you sharing your arts and your history with your people, but you want them to feel included in that culture.
So for any viewers who might not be familiar with the Amana Colonies, if they're not from Iowa or Eastern Iowa, can you give us just a little bit of a flavor of what we find there? It's one of my favorite places to go.
Well, it's a fascinating place. It's actually a collection of 7 small villages with a deep history of coming from Germany. A lot of colonists came here to work and live communally. And so they came here with the sense to worship, but then to serve each other through, whether that was, you know, broom making or, you know, farming or whatever. The nice thing is that in the 1960s, the forefathers of the community really had a vision to the future, and they understand the importance of their culture and preserving the culture. So they quickly made this area part of the National Historic Landmark designation, so that we would preserve our buildings and our aesthetic here. So people that might have never heard of the Amanas, it's like stepping back in time in a way, but there's just so much to see and do that still appeals to the modern sensibilities that I encourage you to take a look.
I love always seeing all the dirndls and the lederhosen sported by the area residents. And we should give a shout out to the most famous graduate of Clear Creek Amana High School, Ashton Kutcher.
Of course, of course.
Yes, very good. Well, thank you so much. And viewers, if you have questions for our panelists, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and then I'll forward them to our moderator and we'll answer them as time allows. So we want to hear from you as well. So Stacy, how has placemaking been enacted and changed in the colonies over the years? Because it is a whole different ballgame than when we just used to go there to celebrate my big brother's birthday in November?
I think historically it started out as just an effort for preservation of the culture, the arts, the history of the community, the narrative that we share with our visitors today. More modern times now, we're looking at integrating our history into activities, experiences that people can come and participate in. It's a wide variety of different things that we try to attract. So we have our Kinderfest that's focused towards young families. We have, of course, our Oktoberfest, which is the biggest event of our year. We see about 60,000 people come through during the course of the weekend to celebrate, all things German, lederhosen included. So, and then of course we have the smaller things where we focus on, we just had our rhubarb day. So we celebrated the culinary arts and all things rhubarb, from jams to pies to crumbles to even rhubarb wine. If you have not tried that, I highly recommend it. But I think more so these days, we're trying to really focus on a way to attract families and get that next generation to engage with the space so they have those positive associations as they grow up.
Very good. And in our previous discussion, Courtney, you mentioned that placemaking can be taken out of context. Do you want to expand on that for our viewers today?
Sure. Yeah, I think there's so the idea of creative placemaking as a field is relatively new. It's been about 13 years since the NEA introduced our grant program, Our Town, which is focused on creative placemaking projects. And there were several different things that were happening at the same time. There was a consortium of philanthropists who joined together to form effectively a fund to support the development of the field, acknowledging that creative placemaking as a concept, the idea that arts and culture are formative for making place, is something that people have been doing ever since they've been, living collectively. So concept not new, but thinking of it as a field and a way of working relatively new. But I do think there are different ways to think about creative placemaking from the NEA's perspective. It's very much driven by local communities. So local neighborhoods, local individuals, even certainly cities and towns, grassroots thinking about projects and activities and work that they want to do with arts and culture at the center. I think that in some cases, the concept has been maybe taken out of context or taken in a direction that is really not the intention, where the idea is it's sort of whitewashing or thinking of a place as a clean slate, and we're going to make a place here. That is not at all the kind of work that we're talking about. I think there's other terms, things like creative, like placekeeping, or place naming is another term that I think is employed in the field. And I think all of those are relevant and related to the idea that every place has its own unique character and qualities and history. Thinking about Amana, certainly that is there. And obviously every place has its own story to tell, and lots of different stories to tell. And so the best creative placemaking projects really look at how those individual stories can bubble up and become visible in the context of the community. So I think the idea that you're making a place because nothing's there is anathema to what the idea behind the way we approach the work is.
So Jason, what kind of a difference has this made in Philadelphia? We've heard about the Amanas that drives visitors there, and now Philly, a great big city. How is it employed there?
Sure. I mean, I think many of the concepts that I used to work at the NEA with Courtney, that we built at the NEA were actually kind of built off work that had happened in Philadelphia for years. I don't know if people know, Philadelphia is America's poorest big city. 20% of the city lives under the poverty line, which means makes less than $15,000 a year. There's some really, I think, also 20% of the city is illiterate. There's some just enormous issues there that the city is dealing with. So artists have really been at the center of trying to work on those issues for a really long time. There's an amazing project called the Village of Arts and Humanities, which is in one of the toughest neighborhoods in Philly. All the problems that you could imagine stacking on a city post the pandemic are very much in this neighborhood. And artists since the 60s, I guess that's been 60 years. I'm not even gonna say how long. That talk about feeling old. And have been working and living in this neighborhood, doing incredible projects to really help the people who live there. I'll give a couple examples. One, they started something called the People's Paper Co-op, which is a woman-led, artist-driven project to help clear people who have just come out of prison's records. It's quite difficult to clear your record if you've come out of prison, and they use all kinds of arts-based activities to do that and advocate for women specifically coming out of prison, which is a big, in some of these neighborhoods, there's a cycle of people coming out of prison, and very hard to get a job if you've got a record. So they, but that's been an artist-driven project. They also are dedicated to bringing 100 families in the neighborhood out of poverty. And so they've been buying houses and restoring them, working with 100 families to try to help build their income and financial basis. And again, using arts-based techniques to do that work. So I just say in Philly, this is really we used to actually talk about it as a national example of how creative people can really dig in to help the community around whatever their issues are. I mean, but we were at the NEA, we funded all kinds of stuff in every size community, from Eskimo villages to a town of 12 people in Colorado. I think it's called Last Chance Colorado. We always used to joke, it's not its last chance, to big cities. So the truth is that, to be creative is human. And this work, literally, it was humbling to see just how it was happening absolutely everywhere, and how communities were coming together across all kinds of things. The news is so depressing, and we used to say, if you want to feel good, you should read these creative placemaking grants at the NEA, because people are really coming together to help their communities. They get fed up at a point and just do stuff. It's the American way. And so not only is it present in Philly, it's present in every inch of this country. So
Diana,
oh, yes.
I was just saying, if I can just add one more thing specific to Philly, but also related to NEA's work, there's a grant we have there that's relatively recent, was awarded to an organization called Tiny WPA. They're a nonprofit that do very neighborhood-based training for adults and youth in basically technical skills around making and building furnishings, and like how to use power tools, how to use hand tools. But they also do a lot of things that are kind of very neighborhood focused, and they've been working with their neighborhood and others around focused on rec centers and reimagining what recreation centers can be in neighborhoods where they are either in decline or just overlooked, or the facilities are not measuring up. And so I think one of the really important things about the work, certainly in Philly, but in all of the NEA's grant funding related to our town, is it requires a partnership between a nonprofit organization and a government entity. So local government is a partner in those projects, and sometimes is the lead, sometimes they're the partner. But that partnership between civic-owned civic spaces, publicly owned spaces, and nonprofits that have the energy and the creativity around activating them is a really key component to the work that we're supporting.
I'll just say one other thing about partnerships.
Oh, yes.
Sorry.
No, that's fine.
Sorry, can't help it. It was incredible to see just how many people were coming together in communities. I think we found on average 15 different organizations were working together on these projects, these really complex projects. I mean, these cities are these big complex beasts, and communities are these big complex things. So it kind of took a village, literally, to do this work, and people figured it out. They got in rooms they hadn't sat in before. If you want to start this work, call people you haven't worked with in the past. They probably have the same mission as you and want to get the same thing done. And a lot of this was just like breaking bread, right? Like we'd hear all the time, oh, we just kind of went out to dinner together and figured something like we should have been working together for the last 30 years. That is very common. So.
And that's exactly what I was going to ask, is about how you find the the local, shoot, what's the word? I have it written down here. The culture bearers, how you find them and how you just get started. But I think you kind of hit on that there.
Sure. I mean, I can talk, Courtney can say a lot about this too. People know who these people are, right? I mean, you can probably name them in your community, right? Right now, everybody can name that person who kind of holds the culture in your community. Absolutely, there are things called state arts councils and local arts councils in the country. Those are government agencies, sometimes at the county level, the city level, or the state level, who track and know many of these creatives. They're government agencies. They have to answer your call. They're supposed to be helping you. So you can just literally reach right out to them. The Iowa State Arts Council would be a great place to start. And they can help you get started, right? They can help you give guidance about how some of the work works, who's in your community already you may want to connect with. And because they're government agencies, they know who's in, like, let's say you want to do a project around health. Well, they know the people in the Department of Public Health. You might know the person in your community who's also trying to do that work, and they can introduce you. And a great place to start is always over food. Just take someone out for a coffee. Come on.
In our community, it's been really important that we've had those partnerships. We're unique in that we don't have a city government here, and a lot of the basic functions of the community are done by nonprofit organizations, boards of volunteers that get together. And it's been vital for the success of the Amana colonies that these different groups work closely together to make those things happen that need to happen, whether that is between our historic sites that functions as the caretaker for our preserving some of our most basic structures, to, of course, the CBB, which I do, to our land use district, which is our only form of local government. I think that when it comes to successful placemaking, you have to have these partnerships. You have to have this community buy-in by multiple organizations. It's about having people invested in what you're doing and not simply saying, oh, you need this, so we're going to give it to you and you're going to love it. You've got to make sure that the people that you're serving find true value in what you're doing. And I always recommend that you not only get those people, the culture bearers, to the table to talk together, but also have your ear out amongst the community, whether that's just anecdotal things that you find out when you're talking to your residents, or whether you do a full-on survey and ask them, what do they want to see in their community? I think it's important to have all of the people at different levels buy into what you're doing.
And speaking of buying, all of this does not come free. You can't stage a major festival or even a parade anymore without incurring costs. So how do you go about finding the funding for the projects?
Well, we do a lot of different sources. So luckily, our business partners in the community realize how important it is to support their visitor center and their festivals. So we do get a lot of funding support through our businesses. Obviously, they are the main benefactors of us recruiting more and more people to the community. But we also receive it through taxes, through the hotel motel tax here in Iowa. That's very important to us. We have sponsorships, we have grants that we apply for. I mean, there's no one secret sauce to fundraising. You've got to find it in many ways. So get creative.
So what are some of the keys for seeking out grants? And I remember when I first was having to make a grant to the Iowa Department of Cultural Affairs, and I looked at it and the form was overwhelming until I decided to tackle it like my taxes, one line at a time. How can you, where can you get help? Like Courtney, are you able to advise people, or do you guys just receive and go through all of the forms and weigh them on their own merits?
We try to help. It's interesting, actually, through the pandemic and since the pandemic, we've actually seen a pretty significant uptick in applications in general at the agency. I think part of that is due to the fact that we have been very intentionally been reaching out to just trying to build a bigger tent, being more accessible to people. I think some of the funding that we got, our funding is congressionally appropriated each year, and we were given large chunks of money, large for us. We're still very small in the whole context of federal funding, but we were able to give out some grants to organizations through the American Rescue Plan, some things like that. So I think there were folks who hadn't thought of us as a source of funding in the past who now do. But in terms of support through the process, there's several different challenges with applying for any federal funding. Everything has to go through grants.gov, which is a very real and sometimes tedious process. So there's a baseline level of information that the government has to have for you to be able to apply. And there are resources through grants.gov. We can't directly manage that system, but they have, webinars and things like that, or tutorials for that kind of basic registration process. For the actual more detailed application process, that's the sort of part 2 of applying for any NEA funding. We have open webinars for opportunities for people to listen in and hear us really talk about what makes a competitive application. We continually try to improve the information on our website, make it more accessible. We've over time continued to do things like make sure that the questions are available ahead of time and that you can actually download a form that has that information. So you're not having to continually go back to find that page on the website. You can download it and have all the information you need for applying. We actually offer our application, our guidelines, not the application itself, but our guidelines in Spanish as well as English now, in an effort to help Hispanic communities and other Spanish-speaking communities be able to understand the process, the application process better. We do answer the phone as often as we can, and certainly respond to emails with questions. Sometimes we have to be rigorous about scheduling those calls if people want to set things up because like I said, demand is sometimes higher than our capacity. We're a small agency, 150 people, including all of our administrative staff. So there's a lot of demand for what we offer, and we do the best we can to be able to be accessible. We also offer feedback to applicants after they apply, whether they're successful or not, which I think is valuable as they look at their projects and are able to think about whether to apply again if they weren't successful, or how to tweak their descriptions and things if they're looking to other funders as well.
And Jason, what can you add to this
Sure.
conversation? Because I know you did the other day when we were chatting, and I know that you were integral in crafting the Our Town project and application itself.
Yeah, I mean, a good way to start is with at the state or local level. Those are absolutely easier applications. Even though you said I feel like doing your taxes. And I think it's always good to work with a grant writer or to have somebody who has maybe done it before. The process of collecting the basic information you need to collect about your organization at the state and the local level would be really helpful for doing it at the feds. I mean, you kind of only need to do that once, right? Like all the basic data crap that you have to collect about yourself, I think you just really only have to get done once, which can be a relief. And then it's really about plug and play. And what changes a lot is like how you're describing the project you're working on. I mean, it is an art form, grant writing, but it is also a skill set that people can learn. And I would just say, don't give up. I mean, I think, the academic rule is that you have to apply 10 times before you get a grant, right? People will be like, oh, I didn't get it, I'm never going to do it again. And it's actually like a call, get your feedback, try again. I mean, it's especially the public money, it is supposed to leave the government and come back to you, right? It is your money coming back to you. And so they want you to have it. They really do. They want you to get it. They want your projects to be better and to get the money. And don't be discouraged if you're in a small community. There are legal requirements at the federal government to distribute the money evenly across the United States. I mean, it is not the National Endowment of New York City. We were told that many times, they'd be like, jump down the list to Iowa, folks, so
Well, and you don't even have to necessarily jump down the list. Sometimes the smaller town projects are the ones that are the most compelling because they are truly local. They're really telling the story of a very particular place crafted by people who live there and love that place. So,
yeah, and I think that's absolutely true. And I would just also say that it's a real chance to validate people locally too, right? Like a lot of people feel like their culture is threatened all over the place right now and are concerned about that. And this is a way to validate those culture bearers, validate and say, this is important to our place and to our people here. And so, and I think those grants are great ways to celebrate, right? It's to move from feeling threatened to feeling celebrated is a really important part of having a thriving democracy. And so I just think it's really important to engage your cultural folks and helping people just feel like they belong in their place. And so, it's worth the hustling.
And there's more money than we might imagine that is available now, especially coming out of the pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, I think that whether or not you agree that these laws were a good thing that they were passed, there's once every 60 years amount of money pouring out of the federal government right now. The 5 infrastructure bills, the relief in the infrastructure bills that are coming out, including everything from the infrastructure bill to the semiconductor bill to the Inflation Reduction Act was the last one. I mean, we've never seen money like this since like the WPA and since this like the 60s. So I don't really think Americans understand how much money is about to pour out into their communities. It's just starting to come out. They have not even spent down the first COVID response bill. I mean, there's still money sitting in that. So there'll be like a huge first wave of money. There'll be a huge second wave of money as like there was the emergency response. Now there's the real like money to really deal with our challenges, money that came out. And then there'll even be a third wave as money goes, like money will not be spent in Newark, New Jersey, that goes back to the feds and that becomes more available to spend in Davenport, Iowa, or somewhere else in Iowa. So like now is the moment to be calling your local representatives and saying, hey, what's money is coming out? We have these concerns in name town, Iowa. What money do you know is available? Could you please tell us where we should be applying and what we should be aware of? Because it's coming. The gusher is open. So, and the people that apply for it are going to get it. I mean, simple as that. Like if there's a chance here that communities could miss out if they're not openly pursuing it. And really your congressional delegation, the people that are supposed to help you with that. So they serve you. Don't forget that.
Yes, absolutely. So Stacey, let's talk a little bit about budgeting, because I think that has to be one of the hardest parts. You have this great idea, hey, let's have a rhubarb festival. Well, how do you budget for that? How do you know what's a realistic ask? Because of course, you might want to say, hey, it's going to take $50,000 to do this, when really, it might take $1,000 or $5,000. How do you go about that whole daunting budgeting thing? Whoops, you're on mute.
That is something I've been facing a lot lately. And what's shocking to me is we've all been seeing inflation impacting us in our daily lives, and it can impact your placemaking efforts much more than you realize until you start getting down to brass taxes. So, cost of materials, cost of labor, if you're hiring or contracting entertainment for your event or for your project, it might be a lot more than you expected. So that is something that I've realized lately through various projects that I've been working on, that we need to, I guess, be more diligent in getting those numbers, getting quotes, getting participants to get back to you. Because the budget sheets that we've had in the past are not applicable anymore. So even I would say for those people who maybe have some collateral out there that they have insured, you may want to re-examine your insurance policies, because we've had to do that too. Cost of materials to replace those items are going up. So as far as budgeting goes, I think if you truly have something that you are passionate about and you want to get it done, maybe it's a rhubarb festival, maybe it's an infrastructure type object, Don't plan on having it done in the blink of an eye. It's going to take a long process of getting quotes, getting schematics, getting input from various vendors or sources, and getting that down to something that's within the ballpark. And there's going to be cost overruns. There's always cost overruns. Everything takes twice as long and 10 times as much money as you think. So give yourself a very healthy cushion when you're doing those budgets, but anticipate unexpected expenses to come up. And then for us, we often try to then reach out to key stakeholders in the community to give us a little bit of seed money that can help us accomplish our goals, whether that's our businesses or whether that is someone who's personally invested in the community. And then we'll look at other funding sources, whether that's ticket sales at our events or even a sponsorship for a band or something of that nature. So budgeting is very tough, and it's getting tougher these days as costs increase, but there's money out there. And I'm glad to hear that it will bypass New York maybe a little bit and come to Iowa too. So that's good.
Excellent. Well, I know that whenever I interview an organizer of a festival, I always say, so when do you start planning next year's? And it's usually like either the day after the current festival closes, or maybe they'll give themselves a week to decompress and get everything cleaned up and back in order. What is a kind of timeline that you would suggest if somebody is wanting to initiate or revive an event or a project? What's a kind of realistic timeline that they should be looking at so that it isn't a last minute, oh my gosh, here, we want to do something in a month, and how are we going to get that done? Anybody with advice?
Well, I can weigh in just on the NEA specifics. I think in general, federal funding takes a long time. It's a 10-month lead time from when you apply to when the funding would be available. It's 8 months between when you apply and when you hear from us that you're going to get the grant or you have the opportunity to get the grant. So it's a long lead time. And that can be really challenging because I think a lot of times the types of projects that we're funding, not only do they have to know ahead of time what they want to do, but sometimes what they want to do requires community engagement and planning. And they don't know what the tasks and the activities and the actual, maybe it's looking at a public space and they're going to do a design process for a town center, but they don't know what that's going to be yet. They don't know exactly like if they're going to commission public art, who's going to do it or what it's going to look like. They need to do community engagement to get to that point. So in order to tap the funds, they have to actually be able to answer some of those questions in terms, like, not to get too deep in the weeds on the grants process, but historic preservation review is a requirement. If you're using federal funds, you have to comply with historic preservation, the National Historic Preservation Act. So anyway, there's a lot of different layers of things that come into play, but we often encourage folks to think about federal funding or NEA funding in a project as maybe a piece of a larger thing. A lot of times these projects are long lead time. There's a long trajectory of something. It's maybe different than planning a festival. Maybe a festival is one piece of a larger effort at social cohesion in a community or at improving health and wellness in a community. And so thinking about our funding as a piece of that, with maybe some work that takes place before, some planning and organizational work while you're waiting to hear from us, and then the grant work, and then there's probably work that happens afterwards. So I would say as much as you can, it's planning far ahead. I think certainly thinking strategically about the partnerships and about who you want to work with on things and starting to build those relationships, that can often take years in any case. And so I think if you're planning a one-off event, it's a little bit of a different approach. But if you're looking at these kind of longer term strengthening communities efforts that really are aimed at systems change in a community, those things take a long time to roll out. And we're conscious that our influence or input, our ability to support something is really maybe going to be just a small piece of a much bigger thing, but it can be catalytic. And I think that's what we hope.
Yeah,
So
I'd
Stacy,
say-
go ahead,
Oh,
Jason.
sorry. I'd say, I mean, I have a couple of platitudes that are very true in this work. One is, move at the speed of trust. It's all about trust building to be able to do any kind of project well. So again, breaking that bread, having that coffee, building the trust with your partners will make it go a lot more smoothly and quicker. And the second is just, don't let perfection get in the way of progress. Doing something visible to show that change can happen and that this work is going to happen. Like, let's say you want to have a mural festival. Philly's very famous for its murals. Go paint a mural. You know what I mean? Like stop, you'll have the festival eventually, but go paint a mural to sit with some people to show that you can get something done and what the progress could be. And some people over talk things. That was not a criticism of academia. Some people over talk things. And sometimes, artists are get-ish done people, so go do something. Do you know what I mean? Just go do it. Throw a little stage up and just have a concert. You know what I mean? And then test it and fail. A lot of this work is about failing and learning from your failures. It's totally okay to fail. That's part of the creative process, and pick yourself up and do it better the next time. So go for it, don't wait.
And I think one thing that I hear from a lot of my friends in the creative community is somebody will plan an event and want to get maybe a band or a singer and just think that they'll do it out of the goodness of their heart. But this is their profession. They need to be paid too. And I think that's an important component to remember, is that, yeah, a lot of people will do things out of the goodness of their heart, but you wouldn't ask your doctor to come over and do, take your tonsils out in the evening. You have to pay for these kinds of things. And so that's the only analogy I could think of off the top of my head.
No, it's a great analogy. No, a fine point on that. It's super important to pay the artists and designers and the culture bearers, right? Some of these are people, it's not their livelihood necessarily, but they are giving time and talent to contribute to these projects, and they should be compensated.
So Stacy, can you talk a little bit about the process of planning a major festival like Oktoberfest versus something like the Colonies in Bloom, which is a fairly new one that I think, in my understanding, is a way to get people to just drive around and see all the beautiful flowers that you guys always plant and how lovely gardens are and things like that. So can you talk a little bit about the difference between planning a large scale event versus something that is a weekend kind of, or a one-day, one-off?
Well, I think it kind of goes back to what Jason was talking about, do something. Don't let perfection get in the way of doing something and getting progress. So I think a lot of our events, so for example, like Oktoberfest, which is a massive event, it started small. It's taken years to get there. And each time we grow the event, we re-examine what we're doing, making sure it's successful, reassessing the priorities of the event, and then moving forward for the next year. We plan very, very early on. The minute the lights go down on the stage for this year, we will be booking our acts for next year. And on bigger events, partnerships are absolutely a must. You have to have a lot of people in the room, having regular committee meetings, having a strong work plan that you revisit regularly. Obviously, those are all things that are important to being successful in a large event. Obviously, communication is huge too. I can't stress that enough. When you're talking to people, pretend like they don't know what you're talking about. Even if you've said it 4 times already, you need to be repetitive until it's ingrained in every single person you encounter. When it comes to the smaller events, I think that those type of things, which are kind of more self-navigated, which is really nice for us because we can step back as event planners and organizers and let those things happen and focus our efforts on those bigger events like Oktoberfest, but the self-guided things like our Colonies in Bloom, those are important too, because what that's doing is you're tapping into a slightly different audience. You might not get those 20, 30-year-olds that are going to go look at the beautiful gardens throughout the Amana Colonies. They're going to come to Oktoberfest, but if you tap into the folks that do want to come see those gardens, they're going to spread the word about your community just as much as those 60,000 people that come to Oktoberfest. So when it comes to planning a smaller event, you may find that you have 1 or 2 volunteers that step in and help out and delegate tasks amongst yourselves and kind of work things out. It might even be something as simple as being able to do one thing on your own and encouraging people to get to your community. But really, I have to stress that always re-examine what you're doing year after year, and don't always keep an activity just because it's always been there. Even if it has a long history, if there is not enough people that are engaged in it and have buy-in to it, it might be time to either reinvent it or let it go to make space for something new. I think a lot of communities, they just get caught up in the tradition of it's always been like this, we need to always do it again. And they lose sight of the potential that their community has to bring in new and exciting things for new and exciting audiences.
Which kind of goes hand in hand with my question about how to make something sustainable or refresh it if it has been going on. I feel like Wurstfest is one that has kind of grown in recent years. And I think whoever's brilliant idea was to have the wiener dog races, that person deserves a little crown, because that is as much fun as going there and watching how long somebody can, or how many, brats they can eat in a minute or whatever.
Or how long they can hold a beer stein out.
Yeah, okay, thank you, because I was thinking of that.
It might not be up for the Eisenmeyer.
I need to buy a ticket to Iowa. This is like, you killing me here.
Yeah.
You cannot deny the cuteness of the wiener dogs, that's for sure.
Yeah, especially when they're in costume. That's just so adorable. But so how do you keep things fresh? Do you find yourself adding, especially like Tannenbaum Forest? I think that Letters to Santa has kind of evolved over the years, or even having Santa with an actual reindeer to greet the kids on some of the weekends. How do you come up with the ideas of just a little something to add to give it a twist to tweak interest?
So I often find that we look at other communities and we brainstorm as a team. Obviously, we get together, we sit down, and just kind of talk about things that we've experienced in other communities that we'd love to integrate into our community, that we can personalize for our community. We also are very lucky in that we do get in a couple of interns every year, and these young ladies or gentlemen have fantastic ideas that they're coming with new enthusiasm. It's that next generation that's got their eye on or their finger on the pulse, I should say, of what's cool and what's new. So your ideas can come from any number of sources, whether that is your personal experience or just a new volunteer that says, hey, I want to make this better. I think that for us, what is fun is that every year we do try to integrate something new. Like, for example, with Colonies in Bloom, that we're doing a hidden gem hunt. So painted rocks are very cool right now in the Midwest, where people are finding them all over out in random spots, whether you're walking on a trail or just happen to be at your doctor's office and you look down and there's an inspirational saying painted on a rock. So we're tapping into that kind of thing this time for Colonies in Bloom, where we'll be hiding painted gemstones. And I say gemstones because they're stones with gems painted on it, of course, into the various gardens and shops that are going to participate. So it's something a little bit of a little different twist to past years, but hopefully it will be enough to attract some people that may not have thought of coming before. And I think if you always have that little something new, you'll find that the event doesn't get so tired.
And I think that the economic driver is an important part, especially for the Amanas, which is a really fun place to shop, whether you're buying food, or I love that there's a Christmas store that's 24, it's 24/7, it's always there. And so how do you integrate it to make it an economic driver as well?
So we do different programs with our local businesses. So we do the Great Amana Ticket Hunt, where if you have a group of people coming into the community, you might get a raffle ticket, and then you have to go to participating businesses to see if your raffle ticket matches one that's posted in that business, and then that is an incentive to get them in those doors. If you do have a matching raffle ticket, you get a prize. The other option, like I said, the gemstones, if people come and they find a gemstone and they return it back to our visitor center, they will get a gift certificate to participating businesses in the area. So there's different ways I think that we can incorporate our businesses into the events or into the activities that we do. That is, it's not just come and shop. I mean, I think that we're facing a bit of a sea change in tourism trends that, people, and when I was growing up, would go to the Amana colonies just for retail tourism. They'd go from shop to shop to shop, and they'd have a great time, and they'd come home with like the back of the station wagon full of packages. People aren't necessarily doing tourism like that anymore. They want to have something to experience, some story to share on their social media. Those picturesque moments, which Amana has a ton of. There's picturesque vistas everywhere. But we have to find ways to kind of integrate a more hands-on experience for people. And then that retail side is a natural byproduct of those things that we're doing.
Excellent. I'd also like,
I think there's also other ways to think about the economic development side of things. I think certainly the kind of festival and retail piece of it that Stacy's been talking about is important and relevant. I think sometimes we see in our town applications projects that are really working on it at a sort of much earlier stage in the process of thinking about job training or thinking about employment for young people. There's one particular project that comes to mind that's in Hindeman, Kentucky, deep in Appalachia, where there is a facility there that has, I'm not going to get the pronunciation right. It's a luthieri. So they make all kinds of stringed instruments, and they've been there for a long time. They've been an anchor for the community for a long time. And in some of their more recent grants, particularly one about 3 or 4 years ago, they came in for a project that was working with people who are in recovery. So they're in rehabilitation of some sort, and they are getting job training on how to do this craft, which is this generations old craft that's not quite a dying art, but certainly a very unique and specific art in their community. But these people are coming out with job skills and coming out with the ability to make this work. So there's both kind of almost like an arts therapy component to it, as well as a job training or job skills aspect, which both helps feed the local economy, but also certainly puts people to work. And it also, there's certainly a retail or sales element to that, in that you can buy these musical instruments that are being made.
Are you seeing any trends right now in the kinds of placemaking events? Like for a while, it was real popular to take, well, in Cedar Rapids, because Grant Wood lived and worked here for a long time, a big part of his life. We had the Overalls All Over project, where there were fiberglass statues that artists could paint whatever design they wanted. And they were placed around the community. And one of them ended up over in Amana's by the visitor center. But, Minneapolis had the Charles Schultz figures, the Peanuts figures. I think Chicago, they did artistic paintings on cow sculptures. Are you seeing any kinds of trends? But I haven't seen those just in the last couple of years. Maybe the pandemic has just messed everything up. But what kind of trends are you seeing in the kinds of efforts people are doing for placemaking?
I think one thing Jason mentioned that I think is relevant. I think in general, murals are often seen as a relatively accessible gateway to public art for communities. Like most small towns or big towns have a blank wall that would look better if it had a mural on it. And so I think a lot of communities are seeing that as a place to start. It can also be a great way to show local character, reflect specific stories that maybe are undertold in the community, right? So you'll see, maybe people are really aware of their, the immigrant heritage, but there's also a story about Native American heritage and people who lived in the place before it became a town. And so those stories sometimes start to bubble up and emerge in the context of some of these mural projects. And then I think those ideally, those kinds of projects lead to further conversations, which lead to deeper engagement and really do start to kind of have a bigger impact than just the beautification of a blank wall. But I think murals are perennially a popular thing that we see in our applications across the agency, really.
Yeah, and we have a big push in the last few years for murals in downtown Cedar Rapids, especially. It's really making good use of blank canvases that are huge and right there for you. So the age-old question. How do you? Oh no, go ahead.
I mean, I don't forget about the power of performance too. All kinds of performance that engages people. And I'm all for what Stacy said about bringing in young people with ideas, but becoming an elder slowly myself, I would say that, it is very important to remember that they're all ages, they're all abilities, the wealthiest population probably in the history of the world is the baby boomers. As a Gen Xer, I always have to think about the baby boomers. They are about to transfer their wealth to millennials and to Gen Xers. And we want different things than what kids want, then as running a school, I don't want the same things my students want, to go to an event. In fact, I wouldn't want to be at an event that only appealed to the youth. It doesn't appeal to me as much. And so, I love being around young people, obviously, but I just, thinking about your multi-generations abilities, having something that's only walkable or doesn't have the ability to sit. You see people planning events a lot that have a lot of music or something. They don't put even any seats for people to rest on, and just little things like that. And making sure your communication with the multitude of audiences that you want to attract are a really important part of planning something that's actually for your community. I mean, some communities, majority of the people there are elders. And so, I don't know, I just we can fall into this only young people have the ideas trap. And I think that that's not necessarily true. Experience has ideas. So
Excellent. This has been such a great conversation. In our last couple minutes, we do have a question from our audience. How do you address the volatility of attendance post-pandemic along with the budget? And I think what that person is getting at is, we know people attended things before the pandemic and then everything shut down. And how do you plan when you don't know how many people are going to show up now? How many people are comfortable with being in crowds? Is it just throwing a dart and hoping?
To some degree, I think it is. So we just had our My Fest celebration, kind of our kickoff to the tourism season recently. And we ran out of beer twice. So, it's kind of surprising. We thought we had quite a bit. We were prepared. We were ready to go. But, last minute scramble, we're, Friday night, we're getting beer. It's Saturday, we're getting beer, and we're hoping for the best. I mean, in a way, it's a good problem to have if you have underestimated your attendance and things get hopping, because then people know, hey, this is the event to go to. But I think one of the things we're facing right now is RAGBRAI is coming through Amana this year, and that is a massive event. I mean, that is going to bring thousands and thousands of people through the Amana colonies. But my advice to all of my folks here, all of our vendors, is plan to sell out, don't plan to serve to everyone, and then encourage them to come back. Find ways to remind them when they get home and they undo their kit that there's more to be seen. So it is kind of a bit of a crapshoot.
Yeah, I mean, if you can figure out what brings people out right now, you're going to make a lot of money. I mean, pandemics shake the world. They always do. They've brought down empires, right? And I think especially around what gets people, when you get it right, because it's huge, right? And I think right now, a lot of people, I can just say this from a college that puts on a lot of events, you end up with a lot of mediocre things sometimes because we're just sort of testing, right? Do people want to come out to this? How do you need to plan it the right way? And it's been a year of testing. And I would say some of our events have been massive and unexpected, and some have been complete bombs. And I think especially for performing arts organizations, that challenge is extremely real right now. But people want to be back in the world. That's absolutely true. I mean, people are back, right? Like downtown Philly is full again with people. We don't have the same struggles other downtowns have right now. But it is a crapshoot. I mean, it is hard, right? Nobody can really figure it out. And it's always a surprise when you go to something really successful, right? You're like, oh my gosh, there's so many people here, you know? And then you go to like the mediocre ones and you're like, gosh, I guess people aren't coming from the house anymore. And so, who knows? And we're only 6 months out of this thing, people. It'll just be an experimental time. So.
Yep. Well, it is 1 o'clock, and I thank everybody for your wisdom, your insight, and your willingness to share it with our audience. It's a big learning curve, and I think this placemaking is so important. And just in showing everybody, this is a great place to visit. It's a great place to live. It's just a great place, period. And so thank you so much. I really appreciate this.
Thank you.
Well, we're happy to be a part of it. Thanks for the
Yes.
invite.
Thanks for having us.